Doctors of Reddit. Which of your patients came the closest to winning a Darwin Award? Story 1. One of my patients came in with second and third degree burns all the way up his right arm. It was winter and his pickup wouldn't start. So he put a match in the gas tank to melt the frozen gasoline. Story 2. One of my patients, male in his 30s, tried to follow a healthy trend and made a medium rare chicken recipe. Results? Severe amoebic dysentery and colitis, almost resulting in bowel perforation. Story 3. I was junior anesthesia trainee. I treated a man who injected poppy juice into his radial artery. He almost lost his hand and he required multiple plastic surgery procedures. A few months later, old mate is back in theater for a repair of the other side of his forearm. He has been riding a bicycle holding onto an idling chainsaw with his other arm. He was riding around cutting down letterboxes. He slipped and chainsawed the good side of the arm he injected poppy juice into. Then there was the youth who saw what he thought was a snake. He went to confirm by picking it up and it bit him. He remained curious, so he picked it up again and was bitten again. We live in an area of Australia where every snake is venomous. Edit. Here is a page on snakes in Tasmania. The most likely snake involved in this story is the white-lipped snake. Story 4. Burns are fun. 1. Decided the gas in the car was dead and threw a few gallons on a bonfire to get rid of it. Spent a month in the burn unit. When he woke up, he told his elderly dad to go ahead and burn the rest of that old gas out back so we can get the car started. I had a long conversation with him. 2. High on shrooms, a man jumped chest first into a fire pit. Miraculously, he was saved by his friends with seemingly minor injuries, and then immediately turned around and jumped back into the pit. 3 months in the burn unit. Story 5. A patient with a methamphetamine addiction attached a Jubilee clip to the base of his penis as a DIY ring, and then promptly forgot about it for several days before presenting to the ED with a severely vascularly compromised. He hadn't even come in because of that, though. It was an incidental finding when undressing him for a secondary survey after he fell from a roof and broke his ankle. We also have very frequent patient presentations, 5-6 per week, having missed dialysis for 1 to 2 weeks and returning scarily high potassium levels. Story 6. Anecdote from Navy corpsman attached to Marines. Marine goes to the admin medic on duty. Doc. What's bothering you, Marine? Marine 1. I have a scorpion sting. Doc. Okay, where? Marine 1. On my. Doc. Okay. Have a seat over there. Next. What brings you here, Marine? Marine 2. I have a scorpion sting. Doc. Okay, where? Marine 2. On my. Doc. Hold on. You, other Marine, come here. Marine 1. Yes, Doc. Doc. You both have scorpion stings? Marine 1. Roger, Doc. Doc. On your nuts? Marine 2. Roger, Doc. Doc. Why? Marine 1. We were bored, and I had caught a scorpion earlier. We had a contest to see who could get stung in the nuts the most without quitting. Marine 2. Beaming with pride. I won! Story 7. Myself, honestly. I got put under with an IV, and afterwards they tried to help me into a wheelchair. Fuck that, I don't need a chair, I slurred as I ate. Story 8. Not in ED, but hematology. We called a guy and told him to come in yesterday afternoon because his routine blood tests before clinic were extremely abnormal, and we needed to start him on urgent treatment. He didn't come in until today because it was raining yesterday. He's now very unwell. Story 9. The one that is a near miss. I can think of off the top of my head modded the electronics on a vape, causing the lithium battery to explode in the right front pocket of his pants, resulting in an extremely severe burn about 1 foot to 1.5 feet in diameter, and burnt his hand completely below the wrist since it was in his pocket. Had his pants been a little baggier, or his pocket been a little deeper, his boys would have been thoroughly roasted and/or detached. Story 10. I volunteered at a hospital, and while on ER duty, a guy was brought in by 5 cops. The genius attempted to rob the school where cops get trained for guns. If you've ever seen one, you've noticed all the guns are bright red and made of rubber. He parked a van up against the building and cut the wire cover off the window. When that didn't work, he walked along the top of the fence with his hands on the wall trying to get to an overhang. He was spotted, and while the guns may be fake, the dog wasn't. Story 11. Have a couple. 1. Guy came in with his in a beer bottle. Apparently he fell on it and then got hard so he couldn't get it out. K, sure buddy. 2. Drank bleach on a dare. Genius friend gave him an alkaline, can't remember what. Thing is, when you neutralize acids with alkaline, there's heat. A lot of heat. Burns along the esophagus. IRC edit. Sorry. Derped and mistook bleach as an acid. Although in this case, the caustic chemical still caused severe esophageal injury, but not a rupture luckily. I confused it while reading up on other dangerous substance ingestions. Sorry for being incorrect. 3. Had a urinary catheter inside, basically a tube inside the penis to drain urine. He didn't like it, or the hospital, tried to pull it out. To keep the catheter inside, we inflate the tip with water. He was very quiet after trying to pull it out. 4. Heard about this one. Tried to make a big custom firecracker but emptying gunpowder from smaller firecrackers into a container. Sure, that's one big explosive, but let's compress it more to fit more boom into it. I think he kept the arm. Story 12. I had a guy get voluntarily defibrillated. Let's just say he was a Mountain Dew type of guy, and he probably isn't long for this world anyway. Our conversation yielded some comical answers for all the wrong reasons. Story 13. Not a doctor, though was a corpsman in the military. One of the Marines attached to my unit approached me one day and wanted me to personally circumcise him. He didn't trust any of the doctors. Story 14. I see quite a lot of successful award winners, but one nominee stands out. You'd be surprised how many men jump out of a window during an argument with their wives. One guy did it but apparently forgot he lived on the 6th floor. Landed on a bus, which partiality broke his fall, but then he fell off the bus and onto a spiked fence. The fence impaled him and get this, ripped open his and amputated one testicle. He was also disemboweled by another spike and shattered his spine and pelvis. He survived, but was paralyzed from the waist down, and he lost the other testicle when it got infected and had to be removed. He didn't have kids, so a true Darwin Award. Story 15. According to the doctor in my life, don't stick random stuff up your. We get these guys in the ER all the time and we hate having to fist them to get it out. Story 16. A guy arrived at the ER after he ate a few pounds of cherries without spitting the stones, so he had to be operated to get them out. The chief doctor came to see the x-ray while the man was being prepared for surgery and said, "Good thing he didn't eat peaches." Story 17. I was a scribe in the ER. We saw a patient who had been drinking and started to feel nauseated while in the car. Her daughter, who was driving, said something like, "You better not throw up in my car." So this lady, who apparently wasn't wearing a seatbelt, had the great idea to open the door while on the highway to throw up. Story 18. Not quite Darwin Award, still dumb. A patient I was involved in caring for decided to see if he could fix the noise in his running lawnmower by putting his fingers under the guard to clear the blockage. A few cuts later, that didn't work. Decided to try it again. Lost 2 fingers. Story 19. EMT here encountered a man who decided his electric bill was too high, so he turned off all the heat in his house. Giant snowstorm came and dumped about 3 feet of snow in less than 2 days. Dude thought he might have frostbite on his toes. He did, actually. So to warm himself up, he drank an entire gallon of antifreeze. Apparently the name is misleading. He thought it would unfreeze him. Put himself into acute renal failure and spent 6 weeks getting inpatient dialysis, among other things, before he was released. Story 20. Today, I had a patient with a head injury having fallen out of a tree. He was trying to climb said tree to fetch his shoe after he made a sober bet he could throw his own shoe over the tree. Dude was in his 40s. He lost the bet, his shoe, and won a concussion. Story 21. Me. I swallowed a pin, and while it was in the back of my throat, I had 2 choices. Cough it up and risk scratch my throat, or swallow it and let my stomach acid disintegrate it. Had to get surgery. Story 22. A doctor thought I was unconscious and was flirting with the nurse. Proceeded to be a douchebag and make fun of my man LMAO, so I looked up and told him, "I bet you I could kick your before security gets here." And I was restrained and was given a tranquilizer. Story 23. I think this question might be better suited for EMS. I was in Middle Tennessee, Cookeville, or Crossville, working EMS. Only been out there 6 months, so I was very unfamiliar with the area and the kinds of people that inhabited the towns. My bus gets dispatched to Chemical Burns at Walmart. Upon arrival, we enter the store and I asked the manager that was waiting for us, "Where is the pool section?" Being from Florida, I assumed some dum-dums were messing around with the pool cleaning products. He looked at me very confused and responded with, "Out at the end of the parking lot." My partner and I hop back in the ambulance and drive to the back corner, where we see a 4-door sedan with the trunk open. 2 white males slumped over, one on the ground with his back against the back tire and the other laying headfirst out of the back seat. I smelled something very odd as soon as my door was opened, stepped out, and before I took my first step, my partner says, "Get back in the bus now." Turns out there too were cooking meth in the trunk of their car and it exploded. Partner called hazmat and they took it from there. Story 24. My mom used to work in a hospital. She used to tell us horror stories of patients. 2 that stood out in my head. 1. Person had a gastric sleeve operation and, to celebrate recovery, decided to drink loads of soda. They drank so much that the carbonation expanded their stomach to the point where the incision ruptured. 2. We had a massive ice storm one year, and power was out for weeks. One family decided to keep warm by bringing their grill inside the house. All 4 family members had carbon monoxide poisoning. They were very lucky to survive. Story 25. Nurse. I had a meth addict come in after he and his buddy tried to make homemade landmines with pipes and gunpowder to protect his weed grow. The landmine blew up in his hand. Story 26. My brother is an A&E doctor and has some good stories. He once had a lady come in who had had a cucumber shoved so hard up her bottom that it had broken through the wall of the lower intestine and disappeared into her abdominal cavity. When she turned up to hospital in a lot of pain, it was essentially floating up by her liver. She needed surgery to remove it and to try to salvage her lower bowel, which was only partially successful. She apparently insisted throughout that it was entirely consensual, and she was enjoying it until her partner slipped. The best bit, it was their first Tinder date. Story 27. Not a doctor, but there are a bunch of stories here that qualify for a Darwin nomination. Story 28. Not a doctor, but I've been to the ER a few times and seen some things. I was in the waiting with a rather nasty infection, strep throat that said, "Hey, let's go scarlet fever." And this guy was wheeled in by his friend? Brother? Not really sure. What I am sure of is that you shouldn't be carrying your penis around in a Ziploc baggie with ice. No idea how this happened, but goddamn. Story 29. I had this one idiot who punched through a glass coffee table cause his stupid football team won the Super Bowl. Motherfucker ruined my night. Fucking hand was a pain in the stitch. To top it off, his GF was there and totally freaked out by the incident. Thus, she wanted to break up with him. And this guy became an emotional wreck and started crying when he realized. He kept leaving the room to talk to his girl or calling her on the phone while I'm trying to take care of him. On top of that, he had to repeatedly get x-rays because despite washing his hand, there were still glass remaining, and he was extremely impatient due to this. At one point, he wanted to walk out hand fucked up and all. I didn't care if he left. I had other patients to worry about. His GF, however, convinced him to stay. I have never met an idiot of that degree in my life, and I hope I never meet him again. He deserves the Darwin Award. Damn this thread for making me remember him. Story 30. A patient undergoing telemetry for preoperative assessment for epilepsy had electrodes implanted in their brain subdurally. Patient got bored after 2 weeks, or sitting around doing nothing with no seizures, and so pulled them out. Amazingly, there were no sequelae. Story 31. I was playing with alcohol and fire, like plastic bottle rockets, whoosh bottle, and jet jars. Well, one day I had to take off the welding glove to tight the base of the gas rocket. Then I fire it. At the moment I clicked the spark plug button, I realized I was missing a glove, and I saw like a slow motion of the skin in my hand, turning red-brown and ripple over itself before feeling any pain. Story 32. Not a doctor, but an EMTI. I'm going to go with the patient who was at a bonfire with friends and fell into the fire. His blood alcohol level was 0.28. He was also on seizure medication. 3rd-degree burns to his entire left arm, 1st and 2nd to his abdomen and leg. He went into a 2.1 AV block during the 2-hour, 20-minute ride to the burn center, resulting in a heart rate of 42 and blood pressure somewhere around 70/30. Play stupid games. Win stupid prizes. Story 33. Had a gentleman shoot up heroin while on the job at a construction site. Apparently started falling asleep and propped his head up with the business end of a nail gun, with his finger in the trigger. Survived, relatively unharmed, save the 3 to 4 inch nail that extended from under his jaw upwards into his mouth. Successfully removed in surgery. Story 34. Obligatory. Not a doctor, but a witness. Watched my dad hold his scotch in one hand and steady a piece of in the other, so my 7-year-old brother could use a full-size axe to split the. They were able to reattach my dad's finger, but he's never had much use of it. Story 35. From my doctor uncle who heard it down the grapevine, he works upstairs. A guy came in because he decided to snort pure capsaicin. He actually died. I'm very convinced he would have won a Darwin Award if his family applied him. Story 36. Story from my mom, who was an ER nurse practitioner. A man came in with his penis stuck in a mini grill. Apparently, him and his wife were doing some ultra kinky. And when circulation cut off to his penis, the end of it that was stuck in the grill inflated to the size of a water balloon, so they had to saw the grill off. Story 37. We had a 16-year-old put a NuvaRing birth control ring around her wrist. Should be inserted intravaginally. I, for one, was impressed that she got it to fit around her wrist. It's so small. Story 38. Had a man in his late 60s present with no bowel movement in 7 days. You know this is going to be bad. Expected impacted bowel. It was impacted all right. Radiology showed an inverted 12-Oz bar glass in his bowel. Story 39. I'm only an EMT, but it's the same story as an ER doctor. A guy standing on a ladder trimming his tree with a weed whacker. Great learning experience when as a new EMT, because he had virtually every kind of skin injury you can imagine. Story 40. Medical student here. I was in the ER when someone with a broken light bulb in their rectum arrived. The story was they were changing the lights, and it was on the floor, and they fell on it. Story 41. This was not a patient of mine, but a colleague had a patient whose birth control pills made her sick, so she gave it to her boyfriend to take. Ha ha ha. I always wondered if he had some breast enlargement or got emotional during that time. Adolescent medicine is a goldmine for this kind of stuff. The icing on the cake is my colleague won some money after submitting the story to Reader's Digest. Or so they said. I didn't actually check. Story 42. My aunt and uncle worked ER for years until they retired. One of my uncle's favorite stories was about an obese gentleman who tossed his rifle out of his truck window during deer season. The rifle went off and shot him through the door of the vehicle. The bullet entered the love handle on the left side and traveled around his back and stopped in the fat on the right side. My uncle said he removed a bewildering amount of truck door from inside the wound before he even managed to get to the bullet. Story 43. First responder. Big guy doped up on heroin is dropped off by his friends at a rehab clinic, goes to the bathroom while getting registered, proceeds to inject double the amount he already had in him. Story 44. The 12-year-old kid who ate a few super magnets. Not a smart idea. For those who aren't sure why this is a bad idea, those magnets will attract each other and can erode or cause the death of parts of your intestinal walls, which leads to the contents of your guts spilling out into your bowels, abdominal cavity. He had to have surgery to remove them. Edit. Words. Story 45. When I was working as dental assistant, a guy phoned to cancel his appointment because he had toothache. We also went on a home visit to an old lady. She hadn't took her dentures out for years. We took them out and there was maggots under it. It was so gross. Poor lady was very old and had dementia. Was a shame, really. Story 46. Not a Darwin Award, but a sad one. Was doing clinicals at a children's hospital. Someone abandoned a baby at the hospital and I was charged with taking care of her. We ran some blood tests on the baby and she was HIV positive. Story 47. Nearly died during PT because he took a shitload of pre-workout. Said he wouldn't stop because he's gotta be pretty for the girls. A month later, some other fucking retard just dropped dead during a run due to the same thing. Story 48. My grandpa was working in the ER one time, and somebody came in with third-degree burns everywhere. The barbecue wasn't getting hot fast enough, so he dumped some gasoline on it. Story 49. Placed a curling iron in an exit-only cavity. Stated he had no idea how it got there. Emergency surgery ensues. Died of sepsis and stupidity. Darwin won that day. Story 50. Not an ER doc, but once had a patient in the OR for an irrigation and debridement for a really severe case of necrotizing fasciitis in his upper thigh. Apparently, he was getting sick, so he decided to inject himself in the leg with some horse antibiotic he had out in the barn. The dead tissue fell out like roast beef and the smell was atrocious. Story 51. Not a doctor, but my dad is, and he often tells me about all the odd patients he encounters. Here's one of them. A young man comes into the ER complaining that his heart was racing every time he worked out over the last 2 months. The man says that it takes 5-10 minutes for his heart to slow down once he stopped exerting himself. My dad stared at him blankly and then reassured him that this was because he was performing aerobic exercise and would get used to it if he continued exercising. Story 52. Not the doctor. X treated a guy who sliced through half of his arm while trimming hedges. Why is half important? Because he could close his hand but not open it. Best part? This wasn't his first time that he'd done this. Last time, he'd cut it from underneath. Story 53. It's apparently somewhat common for committed drug users to inject a concoction of meth, Viagra, and whatever else they can find directly into the penis. The worst one had tried it multiple times, because he couldn't get it up after the horrible priapism the first time, and ended up with a raging penis infection and now urinates into a bag through a suprapubic catheter forever. Another had an ill-fated amateur penis piercing by his buddy while high on meth with similar results. I suppose these meet the criteria for the Darwin since it's unlikely they'll reproduce. Story 54. Family went mushroom hunting without really having any knowledge about mushroom safety. The grandmother made some food out of the mushrooms and the whole family ate it. They ended up with 2 died of acute liver failure, 2 got liver transplants. 1 had acute liver failure but survived. 1 had liver injury that did not progress to failure. Story 55. I have a coworker with a heroin addiction, and one lie he uses to cover up being high all the time is that he is sick or doesn't feel well. He once went to the ER 6 times in 2 months to try to make his excuses seem legit to his girlfriend. Thousands of dollars of debt later, they are still together, and when she sees him high as he says something like, "I have the flu." Darwinism. Story 56. Not a doctor or EMT, but My brother-in-law once poured gas on a pile of brush, then tried to light it with his Bic. Luckily, it blew him backwards, and he only suffered from complete loss of all facial hair and what looked a bad sunburn. Story 57. My dad, who has had 5 back surgeries, decided to help the construction people who were building our garage by catching their chainsaw they wanted to hand down. 1. Rather than put his coffee down, he was going to catch it with one hand. 2. He had them drop it down because he didn't feel like climbing halfway up the ladder to grab it. 3. After a deep cut to his leg, you could see the bone, it took us 4 hours to convince him that he needed to go to the hospital. 4. Stubborn still didn't spill a drop of coffee. Story 58. 1. His kidneys recovered enough for me to transport him to a rehab hospital later. He was still getting outpatient dialysis. I don't know his final prognosis. 2. He did not lose his sight. His only serious and long-term problem was that he destroyed his kidneys. Story 59. Not a doctor, but a personal experience. One winter day, it was very, very cold out, and my truck wouldn't start thinking. My gas was frozen. I tried to drop a match into my tank to thaw it out a little, and boom, my arm was well done. Story 60. One of my slightly more distant cousins had to cancel her official wedding because her husband was in the hospital. They just ended up having a quick ceremony there. Why was he in the hospital, you ask? Well, he was getting the barbecue ready and decided it was taking too long, so he figured he would dump some gasoline on it. The kicker? He is a firefighter. Yes, a firefighter decided to pour gasoline on his barbecue because it wasn't lighting fast enough, then had to cancel the wedding because he ended up with 2nd and 3rd degree burns and a stay in the hospital burn ward. Story 61. My wife worked EMS some years ago and once responded to a call where a kid, teenaged but old enough to drive, had decided to siphon gas out of his neighbor's car while they were out of town on vacation. Mind you, that was back in 2008 or so when prices had gotten up close to 4 gal. In his infinite wisdom, he decided to use a shop vac to get it going. Story 62. I actually just showed this to my mom. She said here at one point in the early 80s that it got down to 30 degrees Celsius at night, and when she was going to work in the morning, truck drivers were pulling off the road and lighting little fires under the gas tank because it had gone to jelly, it was so cold. Edit. Grammar. Story 63. Observing human interactions with cars is the best way to conceptualize how far our world has outstripped our biology. We are Windows 10, attempting to run on a Commodore 64. Story 64. My dad once sold an old crappy car to a guy he worked with, who was buying it for his nephew. The guy proceeded to tell the story of why he needed the car. Apparently, nephew and some of his buddies had obtained a propane tank. With some redneck MacGyver magic, they fashioned a huffing mask. They were doing this in the car. Now they were all getting high and having a good old brain-killing time right up to the point where one of them needs a cigarette. Apparently, there was a leak around the mask, and enough propane had accumulated to explode. Car windows exploded, and the seats burned. Miscellaneous 2nd-degree burns for the geniuses huffing propane and a much older, crappier car. Story 65. Disclaimer. I worked as a paramedic for 5 years. Ran a call where a guy's car stopped running, and he was able to pull over to the side of the road. He decided to check the gas level by peering into the gas tank. He pulled out his Zippo, lit it, and bent over. Just as the Zippo came close to the tank, he was struck by another car, spent a couple weeks in the ICU but was probably better off than if he was burned. Story 66. Everybody always makes fun of Gordon Ramsay bellowing, "It's effing raw." But things like this is exactly why he flips his every time he sees an undercooked dish. Poorly prepared food can kill people. Story 67. Undercooked meat frightens me. Recently, the Ontario government decided that it's safe to serve medium rare. Can't wait for trichinosis to make a comeback. Story 68. Very relevant video. The black guy in the chef hat had me laughing so hard I was in tears the first time I saw it. Story 69. My friend has worked in the service industry for most of his life. He confided in me that when he prepares chicken for himself, he leaves it a tad undercooked and lets it sit for a bit, since it will still keep cooking once it's removed from the heat source. But he never trusts anyone else to do it like that, and will never do it for anyone else, just in case. He also rarely orders or chicken in restaurants because of that reason. He's seen too many things in the kitchens. Story 70. As someone who doesn't cook with or beef, only poultry, and finds the concept of medium rare or rare meat weird, why can beef be cooked medium rare and chicken not? Story 71. I had duck at this fancy restaurant a few years back. It was intentionally served medium rare. I didn't know much about duck, but it's AE. And I know you can't eat chicken undercooked, so I was a little nervous. But I figured the restaurant knew what they were doing. I was told it would be medium rare, so it wasn't an accident. I tried it, and it was amazing. Did not get sick either. Medium rare duck. Shocker, wonderful dining experience. Medium rare chicken? AskReddit. Story 72. The thought of raw chicken makes me gag to no end. There's this picture of this guy bragging on Facebook about how he likes his chicken cooked rare, and it's the only way to eat chicken. He shows a picture of this green half-cooked chicken breast and shows the cut open inside where it's still pink as. Nothing on the internet grosses me out more than that picture. Story 73. I had a great uncle who was deaf and a little senile and lived in rattlesnake country, USA. He was bitten on at least 5 different occasions, presumably because he could never hear the rattle. The best story was when he was struck twice in the leg, but the snake barely penetrated his boots. He got mad and reached down to grab it, and was then bitten multiple times on the arms before he killed the snake. He kept skins and skeletons of rattlers all over his house. Also had a pet quail. Fun guy. Story 74. We live in an area of Australia where every snake is venomous. Wait, there's an area of Australia where not every snake is venomous? If I ever visit, my plan has always been to just assume every plant and animal is poisonous until proven otherwise. Story 75. That last part is crazy. I mean, an episode of Peppa Pig was banned here because it showed a spider in a positive light, and in Australia, a lot of spiders just want to kill us. Every kid is taught never to touch or go near a snake. What an idiot. Story 76. Sounds like my brother who nearly sliced the tip of his finger off because he wanted to see how sharp the razor blade was. He cut into the pad of his index finger, but only through the first few layers of skin so there was little pain or blood. He then decided that it wasn't a proper test, and so he sliced his finger again, only deeper. Well, the second time he cut down to the bone, and blood was now gushing from his finger. That's when he concluded that the razor blade was indeed very sharp. Also, we live in an area where every razor blade is sharp. Story 77. Do they not have sticks to poke things with there? How about rakes or other things with long handles? JFC. I'm in America, and I wouldn't pick up a random snake. Story 78. Then there was the youth who saw what he thought was a snake. He went to confirm by picking it up and it bit him. He remained curious, so he picked it up again and was bitten again. A bright shining star, just reaching for his Darwin Award. Story 79. What exactly is in poppy juice? Is it like juice from seeped plant matter? Why the artery? See lots of crazy stuff here, but only one snake bite. And that was a drug dealer who kept rattlesnakes to protect his cash and product. Geez, the medical side of me has so many questions, and I know that most likely the answers will be just cause. Story 80. Still not buying it, even with the edits. Freezing of human tissue isn't instant. Even with the extreme cold of expanding NO2, it would take quite some time. So how and why on earth did she remain with her face next to the tank outflow for the considerable amount of time it would require for the entire 20-gallon tank to empty into her face and lungs, somehow freezing them? This sounds like some questionable embellishments to an otherwise believable story. A girl who dies of lung damage from inhaling from a high-pressure source. Freezing of her lungs, throat, mouth, and facial tissue seems massively far-fetched. 2 other things to note. 1. Gas cylinders are generally measured by weight, not gallons. 2. Most gas cylinders of this type have safety pressure valves to prevent explosions caused by temperature changes, so I'm also questioning your claim they tend to explode in hot weather. Story 81. I had to blow up a bunch of balloons with a helium tank in high school, and we were inhaling the helium out of the balloons to make our voices squeaky. Told my mom about it, and she got deathly serious. Said to never inhale directly from the tank, or it would kill you. Story 82. Freezes off? I don't buy it. Sure, she'd get a blast of cold nitrous, but there's no chance of it freezing her face from the inside out. Edit. Wow. Downvotes galore for daring to question a third-hand, inconsistent story which doesn't make a lot of sense. I see Darwin Awards in all your futures. Story 83. Not buying that at all. I used to work with lots of liquid nitrogen too and witness some spillage. E.g. on a hot day in a clean room, I used to pour the stuff on my boots for a bit of inbuilt cooling, more likely to damage her lungs with the high-pressure gas. Story 84. Man, the multiple times I did shrooms all I did was chill out, listen to music, and enjoy the experience. I never had the urge to even leave my house. Story 85. Dad was in the army, in charge of trash burning duty, tells the people he sends to put gas in before he burns it. Soldier wanted to throw gas on it because it would look cool. Burn ward. Story 86. Number 1 was hilarious, only because I imagined it going something like how Mr. Krabs was with his mattress in the junkyard. The hospital part, not so funny. Story 87. Every time this tread comes up, the number 1 involves alcohol and bonfires, and the doc always has the same message: keep accelerants away from fire. Story 88. Oh my god, that first one made me roll my eyes. I know practically nothing about fire safety, but I know not to throw gas on a fucking lit fire. If I was intent on burning old gas, I'd pour it on the bonfire well before it was lit and spread it out. Maybe use some of it as a trail to light it from a distance, just in case it goes out of control. Story 89. Then promptly forgot about it for several days. Is this because of the meth? Or is it easy for guys to forget there's a metal ring on their penis? Story 90. Scarily high potassium levels. My mother is the opposite of that. All through chemo, they'd test her and then spend a day hanging bag after bag of potassium on her. Story 91. I absolutely hate admitting patients that willingly miss dialysis and then come in and make it a huge emergency. It's probably my most disliked form of medical noncompliance. Story 92. I've never done meth, but I have experience with uppers and not sleeping, and I have felt numb and out of my body, so just imagining how tweaked you'd have to be to forget you have a ring in is terrifying. Story 93. I once had to pass a drug test, so I washed a condom, unused, just needed to get the lube off, and tied it under had a 30-minute bus ride to my employer. Woke up and couldn't feel my ADOL. Panic ensued. Removed condom balloon. And by the end of the day, feeling returned, thank goodness. Fucker didn't even test me. He said showing up is proof enough. Story 94. This reminds me of a joke my grandfather, a doctor, once told me. A guy is walking down the street and sees a funeral procession with two caskets, one white, one black. So he asks someone in the procession what happened. Well, says the man, these two had a contest to see who could stick his head out furthest from a moving train in that tunnel. The guy in the black casket won. Story 95. I remember when I was in the army, two guys in my unit had a lighting contest. Not in secret, mind you, right in the middle of the hall in the admin building. The winner literally caught of his BDUs on fire and ended up with burns on his taint, and he was also dating my sister at the time, so I made sure to tell her the story.